Today's daf we're going to be learning is Sotah daf Mem Daled. We're going to get started from the very bottom of Mem Gimel Amud Bet. If you remember, we got off on a tangent of speaking about different statements of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov that were quoted by Rabbi Yochanan. First, we started with Rabbanit quoting Rabbi Yochanan. Now we have Rabbi Yitzchak quoting Rabbi Yochanan. Most of them were about how things appear, and they appear to be different, and yet we rule by how they appear. This is a little similar, but in a bit of a different category, but also has to do a little bit with how things appear. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, I'm at the very last words of Mem Gimel Amud Bet. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Met tofes arba amot letuma. A dead body, if you pass over a dead body, put your hand over a dead body, that is called what we call laha'ahil, to kind of create a tent over the dead body, and tuma goes up, right? There's a dead body on the ground, tuma goes up, and you become impure. Came the rabbis and they said, listen, it's not just if you pass over where the dead body actually is, but 4 cubits within the dead body, we assume there's a large chance that if you were within 4 cubits, you probably, even if you didn't notice, put your hand over the dead body, somehow came in contact with it or kind of made this tent over it, which basically the rabbis then said, anyone who comes within 4 cubits of this dead body is going to be impure. This is a little similar because it looks like you went over the dead body, even if you didn't necessarily. So it again has a little bit to do with looks. It's not exactly a marit ayin, although maybe it could be a little similar. Vitana tuna, but now we're going to have a Tanaitic source about this. Chatzer hakevel haomed betochat hahol v'hu sheyeh ba'arba amot divrei Beit Shammai. But if you have a courtyard outside the grave, and we're going to have a case where you're within 4 cubits, and yet you're not going to be considered impure. This Gzeirah of the rabbis, this ordinance that the rabbis instituted won't be relevant to you. So what's the case? There's a courtyard outside the grave. Exactly what this is, it's a good question. It seems like there was an area, it's not exactly a courtyard outside the burial cave, but it was really the entrance area of the burial cave, which we'll see at the very end of the sugya was designated also, there were walls or some sort of barrier between it and the space where the body was buried. So because it's judged as independent space, you could theoretically be in that space within 4 cubits of the dead body, but we're not going to say that you were probably impure because you were in this distinct area called the courtyard of the grave. There's a picture in the Koran, although it's not a perfect, it shows an old burial cave, but it's not exactly clear. It seems to be this rounded opening on the side, and that perhaps the opening area is what's called the courtyard. It wasn't 100% clear to me, but you can try to look there, maybe it'll help. So now we're going to also talk about 2 different types of chatzerot and openings of this grave. So now, according to Beit Shammai, if the space is 4 cubits, right, about 4 cubits by 4 cubits, that courtyard area, then you don't have to worry that maybe even if you're standing at the very side of that and you're within 4 cubits of the dead body that's in the cave, you don't have to worry that you came in contact because it's a distinct area. Beit Hillel omrim arba'at tvachim. Forget 4 cubits, which is, approximately from your elbow to your hand, but 4 handbreadths, okay, which is much smaller. Take 4 fists, right? That length, even 4 fists by 4 fists, if that courtyard is 4 by 4 fachim, that's already enough to set it aside as a distinct area. You might remember machlokot from Eruvin, you might not, but you might remember there were a lot of cases where we had these debates, 4 tfachim or 4 cubits, okay? Because both of those are considered in distinct spaces. It's just for different things or different opinions about whether 4 by 4 tfachim is enough of its own space or do you need 4 by 4 cubits. Now we're going to limit to Beit Hillel though. When Beit Hillel say the 4 tfachim is sufficient, b'med dvarim amurim shepitcha milamala aval pitcha minatzad divrei kol arba amot. So I mentioned that the picture in the Koran has an entrance on the side. Now, you could possibly have a way you get into the grave through the top. Imagine like a pit in the ground, and you kind of hoist yourself inside through this hole in the ground, and underneath is the burial cave. So there's 2 types of chatzerot. One is this entrance area that you kind of jump into, and one is you come in from the side. So now which is which? So they say, when Beit Hillel said 4 by 4 tefachim is sufficient to set this aside as a distinct area, that's if, and then you don't have to worry that you came in contact with the dead body, even if you were within 4 cubits from it. That's only when the opening is at the top. But if the opening's at the side, you definitely need 4 cubits. We don't really understand the logic here, neither does the Gemara, so I'm not going to even attempt to explain the logic because the Gemara right now is going to flip it and say, wait, what on earth are you talking about? Adrabah, it's the opposite. Min hatzad midred v'nafe. If it's on the side, the entrance, then you can easily go in through the entrance, walk into that courtyard, and not be near the dead body and know that you didn't come in contact with it, even if it's a very small area. But milamala, yefshar delo ma'ahil. But when you hoist yourself down, think about it. Try to imagine yourself hoisting yourself down into this pit. Your legs start flailing a little. They go off to the side. It's much more likely that when you jump down into it, that you actually came in contact with the dead body. And therefore, ela b'mid dvarim amurim, they say switch the cases. In which case is Beit Hillel saying 4 by 4 tvachim is sufficient. Shepitcham in atzad, where the entrance is on the side. But if the entrance is from the top, then it's 4 cubits. The last issue about this, and then we move back to our topic. This is only in a courtyard where there's barriers, and it's a very clear distinction between this area and the area where the body is. But if it's a meit ba'alma, if you're in the field and there's a dead body there, then tafis. Then obviously we're going to go back to this rabbinic ordinance of 4 cubits. If you're within 4 cubits of the dead body, we're going to assume that you're impure. Okay, back to our regular scheduled program. We're now on mi ha'ish asher eras isha. So we went through, and you're going to see the exact same sugya with just a few different words, which is, right, we're going to darshan who, right, all these things, we're going to include more cases, we're going to exclude more cases for the exact same reasons as we did in the past. Tanu Rabbanit, although there's no drashot on the ish in this case. Asher eras. So asher eras seems to include in any way the he betrothed her, which seems to include other cases. Echad ha'ma'areset ha'petula, echad ha'ma'areset ha'almana, echad shomeret yaban, v'afilu 5 achim u'meid echad mehem b'milchama, kulam chozrim. This is a repeat of the halacha we saw in the Mishna, that all these people get to go back from war. If you betrothed a virgin, you betrothed a widow, you betrothed a woman who you're supposed to do yibum with, even if you're just supposed to do yibum because your brother died at war, you can leave the battlefield in order to go take care of yibum. Even if you have 5 brothers, all the brothers go back. Now, this is all from Asher Eras, which includes all sorts of other cases. So what we did in addition to the Mishna was we showed, like in the Midrash Halacha usually do what the Mishna doesn't do, which is they add the psukim. Where do we get this from? The verses. Lo lakach v'lo lakacha, same drasha we had last time, already twice. It doesn't say Asher eras isha v'lo lakach, and didn't yet marry, but it says lo lakacha, and didn't yet marry her. From the fact that they say specifically her, we're going to assume this is a limitation. Only some women. So who does this come to exclude? Prat l'almana l'kohen gadol, grusha v'chalutza l'kohen idiot, mamzer l'nutzina l'Yisrael, bat Yisrael l'mamzer l'natim. All what we call psulei chitun, people who are not allowed to marry other people. So if it was one of these forbidden marriages, like a mamzer can't marry Yisrael, a Kohen can't marry a divorcee, etc. I'm not going to go through all the cases again. We keep seeing them over and over. We have a very long daf, so I'm going to cut where I can. All these cases will not go back from war because you weren't supposed to marry her in the first place. Lema, now we're going to do the same thing we did with the first case, which was Lema Deloka Rabbi Yochanan. Remember, we excluded the robber, and then we said, oh, but Rabbi Yochanan would need to exclude the robber because Rabbi Yochanan, who we're going to see in the next Mishna, finally, we'll see him say it explicitly in the Mishnah, already says, the Rabbi Yochanan, Ha'amar, Hayarei v'rach halevav, zeh ha'mikarei me'averot shebiyadel. Already you get to go back if you're a sinner for a different reason, because you're scared you're going to get killed at the battlefield, right? This is all based on, we've seen this before, that famous story where the wall was falling and nobody wanted to go. They were worried they were going to get punished because you don't go if you have reason to think you're going to get punished. It's not, God could obviously punish you in any way, but when you put yourself in a dangerous place, it kind of opens the door for it easier for you to get punished for it. So don't go to war because you're worried you're going to get killed because of sins. Well, this person already sinned, so this must not be Rabbi Yochanan Galili, because Rabbi Yochanan Galili doesn't need a special drashot to teach you the almana l'kohen gadol and the grushan to kohen idiot and all those cases, because they would anyway be exempt, not because of, they anyway wouldn't be able to go back from war because of yarei v'rach halevav, not because of this pasuk. To which the Gemara says, no, afilu tema Rabbi Yochanan Galili. I'll explain this bright, even according to Rabbi Yochanan Galili, that he would still need a special exception to say they don't belong to this whole situation. They don't get exempt, not because they have sins on their hand, but because of the drashot and the pasuk that it says specifically, likacha, you took her to be your, right? You didn't take her yet to be your wife. That would specifically exclude any of these people. Why? Rabba, because he holds like Rabba. You could say, obviously, Rabba is after Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan is a tana, but he could hold by this opinion that we see Rabba quoting. These people haven't sinned yet. If a Kohen Gadol betroths a widow, or a regular Kohen betroths a divorcee, any of these people, they haven't sinned yet until they marry. Remember, we're all talking about a case where he hasn't yet married her. Until they marry and consummate the marriage, there's no sin. Why is that? Because mata'am lo yikach, it says don't take one of these women in the pasuk. And it also says lo yichalel zaro v'amad, because you will desecrate your seed, your children. So lo yikach mishum lo yichalel. Don't marry them because, or don't betroth them because lo yichalel, because then if you do, you will mess up your children. Because remember, the children become chalali. Mishum hachi, I know also. Therefore, they say until they have relations, which has the potential to have children, they actually haven't sinned. So while they've done something wrong, they haven't really fully sinned yet. So you don't get punished until you actually have relations. These people are in the early stage. They haven't married the women yet. Remember, that's the whole thing. If they married the women, they don't even need to go to this sikha, this speech of the Kohen, and they don't, right? They stay home no matter what. They're not even part of this. So therefore, we're assuming this saying they're not part of this is needed even according to Rabbi Yochanan, who said they wouldn't be part of it because they sinned. No, they haven't really sinned yet. Tanu Rabbanit. Now we get to a cute part of today's daf, which is, let's darshan the order of the psukim. The psukim say who's someone who built a house, right? It's the same order as the Mishna. Who's someone who, right, and didn't get living there, a vineyard, and didn't enjoy the fruits, and betrothed a woman, but didn't get married. So asher bana, asher nata, asher leras, built, planted, betrothed. Limda Torah derech eretz. This is the Torah's advice, giving you good advice, marital advice. When should you get married? Question everybody asks, right? When's the best time, right? Should I get married now? Should I get married later? Should I finish university, get a job? Should I, right? What is the answer to this question? And as you know, many people have many different answers, and doesn't always depend on advanced planning. Some people do, some people just fall in love and say, I'm getting married tomorrow. So here they say, Yivne Adam Bayit. First, you should build your house. Yita Kerem, plant a vineyard. I don't know how many of you planning to plant a vineyard. Va'achar kach yisaisha. And then only after you have everything set, right? Really, it means planting a vineyard is financial stability, right? Have a place to live, have your financial stability of having a vineyard where you can sell your crops, and then you get married. Shlomo said the same thing. Where did he say this? A pasuk in Mishle. Prepare outside your work. Okay, then you should have your field. We'll explain this in a minute. Then you should build your house. Now, it's a little tricky. House comes at the end, but what are they going to say? The first part of the verse is referring to the house. Second part is talking about the vineyard. Because the sadeh. We've seen before that the woman is called, right? She's called debite, the wife of, right? But the house of, really. House often means, right? Shalom bayit, we always call it. Shalom bayit means, right? Peace with good relations with your wife. The wife is called the house. So in the verse, the word house there refers to the wife. So again, what they're basically saying is, and we're going to see this in the next upcoming drashot, that those first two stages are just really preparation for the real ideal, which is the marriage. So you have to have all the pieces in place before you get married. Again, not to say this is the only way to go. This is certainly not a halacha, but it is the rabbis giving you advice about the way they think things should go. Later commentaries raise other issues, which is, what if you don't have a house yet, you don't have this, and you really want to get married, and, they also saw there was a big interest in getting people married because they didn't like people having these hirhurim, these bad thoughts, and thinking to do things in sin. So there's that to balance out as well. Okay, next. Now, because we quoted this pasuk in Mishle, we're now going to quote a whole bunch of different drashot, which are also really interesting about order of things. And in terms of, remember, the last is always going to be the main goal. Okay, it's like a buildup in this pasuk. So they're now going to say, davar acher, a different way of darshaning this. That's Torah. First, learn Torah. Mishna. The second stage, learn Mishna. What's the real building of the house that comes after you learn Torah? After you've learned Mishnah? Talmud. Right? Here's your promo for studying Talmud. Right? That is the end all be all. Now, number one, it sounds like you should first study all of Tanakh and then Mishnah. So I'm not going to say if you didn't do those things, you should stop studying Gemara. But what it's saying is that's the basis. Start with the basics. And then you can, once you understand those, you can get to the ideal. It's just really like a path to get to understanding, to be able to understand the Talmud. Davar acher, a different drashot. Okay, so according to this, the first drashot, right? Talmud is the end all be all. First stage is Mikra and Mishnah together, Torah and Mishnah. Talmud is still only a stepping stone. Hold off. What's it a stepping stone to? Talmud mevili de maaseh, right? What's the whole purpose of learning? Learning is to bring you to good deeds. If you learn and you absorb yourself from learning, that will make you a better person. You'll do good things, whether it's mitzvot ben adam l'chavero or mitzvot ben adam l'makom. It just teaches you. It gives you an appreciation and an understanding. So Talmud is just a stepping stone to get to Maasim Tovim. Again, this doesn't mean, and maybe you can that'll help me with the other one, which it doesn't mean you can't do Maasim Tovim without learning, right? There's no meaning to it. I mean, it could be, you could say they're a little bit meaningless, but I don't think anyone would really say that. It just means the purpose of learning Talmud is to bring you to a place where you really want to do Maasim Tovim. Of course, you can do Maasim Tovim before, which is, like I said, also, you can do Talmud before you do Mishnah and Gemara, Mishnah and Torah, but it does help you to have the basics. Rabbi Eliezer benosh Rabbi Yossi Aglili Omer, and here's the last one. They're all really the first stage. That's just the beginning. That's good deeds. So in other words, again, Talmud and learning, all the learning brings you to good deeds. But what's the last stage? Once you get beyond the initial learning stage and which already brought you to Maasim, then there's a whole value to learning beyond what it gets you to do. It's not just a means to an end to do, right? It's an end in and of itself, which is then there's the pleasure of learning Torah just for now, it's not that you're doing it for getting sachar, but you will get sachar for just the learning. In other words, there's a value to learning independent of, is this bringing you to Maasim Tovim? In other words, the first stage is it brings you to Maasim Tovim. Once you're there, I think of it, it's almost like when you're in the ocean and there's big waves and they're crashing on you. When you get past that, it's the calm, and you have to get through that first stage and then you get to the calm. Like that's the beauty of the Talmud Torah that you get later when you've already gotten to the place of Maasim Tovim. It's not that you shouldn't get, right? You've gotten there. Now your learning is a whole different kind of learning, which is just a learning for the sake of learning. So these are very beautiful concepts to think about. And we have a very long daf, so we're going to move on. Now we get to the people who don't go back. And one of the opinions there, they don't quote this here, but what they're really referring to is Rabbi Yehuda had said, if you knock down your house and rebuild it, because it needed fixing up, that's not called a new house. But this makes a lot of sense. Tana imosifo dimus echad choser. But if you added one row of stones that didn't exist before, then already you go back. Meaning, right, generally, when you do a renovation, it adds all sorts of new things that didn't exist before, and you enjoy them like as if you live in a new house. So if you do that, then obviously you would be able to stay back. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, okay, we talked about this yesterday, how the bricks in the Sharon area are not very stable, and we're going to see it now in a Braita. They would rebuild their houses twice in now Shavua is usually a week in Hebrew, but here it means, and often in the Gemara, Shavua means a 7-year cycle. So twice every 7 years, they would have to rebuild their houses. So therefore, it's a temporary house. You wouldn't get an exemption for going to war for that. These are people who don't move at all. This was the third category. They don't even have to go hear the speech. Right? So now this was all based on a verse in Dvarim. Okay, this is often at the end of Masechta, we have a little bit of a preview to the next one. This isn't exactly a preview, but it is taken from the Psukim in Dvarim, chapter 24. Right after it brings the Psukim about, next Masechet is Gitin, we have Psukim about if you marry a woman and then you want to divorce her, this is what you do. Immediately after that, it says, Ki yikach ish isha chadasha, if a man marries a new woman, we're going to have to talk about why do they call her isha chadasha, it's a very strange language. Lo yetze b'tzavah, he doesn't go out to war. V'lo ya'avor alav l'chol davar, and he doesn't do anything. Naki, we'll talk about what that means. Naki yeh lebeito shana achad, he will be free to be in his house for 1 year. V'simach b'ishto asher lakach, and he keeps his wife happy. We already darshan this to show that it's including the woman, it's including the house and the vineyard. Okay, so now they say the following. Tanu Rabbanan, the Braita tries to deal with this Isha Hadasha. Isha Hadasha and Isha Hadasha. Sounds like a new wife. What does that mean? A woman who's never been married before. Almanal Grusha Minayim, but we already learned that if you marry a divorcee or you marry a widow, you'd also be able to get that year. Talmud Lamal Isha, because he calls her a woman, it means any kind of woman. However, it also says Hadasha. So obviously the Braita is going to ask him, Talmud Lamar Isha Hadasha. So why does it say Hadasha? Misha Hadasha Lo. She has to be new to him. What does this exclude? We saw this case in the Mishna. If you remarry the woman who you divorced, then you would have to go out to war because that's not a new wife for you. Obviously, we're talking about a case where it's permitted to you, right? Remember, if she marries someone in the interim, then it's forbidden, and that would be for a different reason. But here we're talking about even if it was permitted to you, if she didn't marry anyone in the interim and you brought back your wife who you were divorced from, you wouldn't be able to get that exemption. And that's from the Hadasha, new. Tanu Rabbanan, lo yetze b'tzavah. Yaakov b'tzavah de lo yetze. So that sounds like don't go to war. But yaspik mayim u'mazon v'yitaken drachim. But maybe you should work on the home front, giving out food to people, water, fixing the roads. Talmud lamal v'lo ya'avor alav l'chol davar. That's why they add and don't do anything. You don't even have to work at the home front. Maybe, now why you would think this is a good question if you have already the section in Dvarim chapter 20 that we already read, but they're suggesting maybe you would think not working on the home front would apply also. In other words, anyone exempt from war maybe would be able to not work on the home front. Remember, we said that was the difference between this category, another difference in this category and that one. Not only did they don't have to go hear the speech, but they're also exempt from the home front, whereas the other group of people have to work on the home front. So now they're suggesting maybe you would have thought all those people who haven't yet enjoyed the fruits, haven't yet married the wife, haven't yet, right? They have lived in their house. They maybe also don't have to work on the home front. Well, the answer is Talmud Lomar alav. Lo ya'avor alav l'chol davar. Alav is a word for you, meaning, on this person, meaning this person and not other people. Only the person talked about in this category where he already married. Alav atama avir al achirim. In other words, he doesn't have to work at the home front, but other people do, and that must include the category that we saw in Dvarim chapter 20. Now they ask one last question on this section. If you already said this person doesn't have to do anything, then why would you have to say he doesn't go out to war? It'd be obvious he doesn't go out to war. This is very interesting. This is to say you transgress two things. If you go out to war, you've number one, you're not supposed to do anything. You're supposed to make your wife happy. Number two, you're also over on you can't go work in the army. So now this is very interesting. Why would you need two lavim for this? It seems to me, right, this is a very natural thing where someone gets married and they're torn. My country's going out to war. Should I go out to war? Should I not go out to war? Now, we'll talk about later that this exemption only applies to certain types of war. But even so, people are going out to war. It's hard for you to sit home with your wife and feeling like, army, country's at war and I'm just sitting here. So I think the Torah, the Gemara wants to stress, no, you might feel that pull, but you have this other obligation and you have to take care of that obligation, which is making your wife happy. In the first year, that's a really important obligation. And therefore, you really should not be going out to war, which is very interesting. Okay, new Mishna. Now we're getting to the last section of the speech. So now they continue to talk and they say, if you remember this part, we said only the shotrim, the officers say. And then what do they say? Whoever's scared goes home. So Rabbi Akiva Omer, Hayarei v'rach halevav kimashmao, she'eno yachol la'amod b'keshrei milchama l'rot cherev shlupa. This is what we would call a squeamish person, right? You can't see a sword, you get scared, you get nervous, you go crazy. No, those people, that's what it's talking about. You get to go home. Rabbi Yossi Glili Omer, we finally get to see this inside. This is someone who's scared because they have sins and they're worried that God will punish them at the war. This is very interesting. Therefore, the Torah gave these people, so that you won't be embarrassed to say, I sinned. They gave these people excuses. They mentioned if you have a house, if you have a vineyard, if you have a new wife, all these cases to kind of allow for all sorts, right? If you think about it, there's lots of people who might have built a new house, built a vineyard, especially we added all these extra situations where you inherited it, you didn't necessarily build it, they gave all these examples so that people could hide under one of those and not have to say, oh, I'm going back because I sinned, because that would be humiliating. So they could hopefully fit into one of those other categories as well. Not that they could lie and say, I built a house, and he didn't really, but the point is there's all these categories so that you don't have to admit in public, oh, I sinned. Rabbi Yossi Omer, our third opinion, Almana l'kohen gadol, grusha v'chalutza l'kohen adyom, mamzer nitina l'Yisrael, ba'Yisrael mamzer l'natin, harehu hayarei v'rach halevav. The yarei v'rach halevav are all these people who married the wrong people, okay? If they married someone they shouldn't have married, that's who we're talking about, who's yarei v'rach halevav. Now, this is very similar to Rabbi Yossi Glili, because it's someone who has a sin in their hands, except he's being very specific. So we're going to have to wait till the Gemara to understand really all the differences of opinion between these three people. Okay, next. We kind of read this pasuk before, but we didn't really explain it. At the end, the very last pasuk is when the Shotrim finished speaking, they put people in charge in the front of the people. Okay, which sounds like after all this, we got rid of all these people. Now we go out to war with important people at the head. Well, comes the Mishna and says, and they put people in the back too. Right? I'm thinking when you go on a hike with school, right? You have someone in the beginning making sure the kids don't get lost, and someone at the end making sure the kids don't get lost, right? Someone leading the way, somebody protecting in the back. Now, why do they do this? So they put people in front, they put people in back. They have iron rods in their hands. At this point, we gave everybody an out before. If you get scared while we're at war, those guys at the back or in the front are going to be able to smack you in your legs to kind of whip you into shape and say, there is no way out at this point. Why is that? Turning now to Amud Bet. Shetzilat nisa nefila. We're going to see in the Gemara that really should be the reverse order. What it really means is the beginning of the defeat comes from people running away. People run away. That will be the cause of the defeat, or could cause defeat. And we're going to quote it from two psukim in Sefer Shmuel, one in the beginning of Shmuel Aleph, one in the end of Shmuel Aleph. The first one is in the battle where Eli's sons die, and the messenger comes to tell him. And when he tells him the story of what happened, that his sons died, he says, Nas Yisrael lifnei Plishtim v'gam magepah gdola hayta ba'am. Okay, the first thing he says is they ran away from the Philistines. So that's what caused their death. And another one, it says they ran away from the Plishtim, and then it says, and then they fell dead. Okay, so that, because now you could say for two reasons. Number one, it causes demoralization of the people, which is exactly what the pasuk said, get rid of all the scaredy cats among you, because they're going to cause people to get scared, affect other people. And then once other people lose confidence, then it's very hard to fight without having confidence. Number two, it shows the enemy that you're losing confidence, which gives them the opportunity to say, oh, this is a good time to attack. We'll attack you when you're weak. Here's a very famous line of this Mishna. In which case are we referring to? All these speeches are made in what case? In milchamot that are voluntary. We're going to have to see later what is defined as what. We'll get to that in the Gemara. But if it's a mechemet mitzvah, everybody goes out. Okay, there's no exemptions at all. Afilu chatam michidro v'kala michupatat. Even the chatam from his room and the kala from the chuppah. What do you see here? Women go out to war as well. Okay, very fascinating. And there's a fascinating debate about this, because the simple reading of the Mishnah is women go out to war. Even a bride, right? You imagine this bride with her dress. She goes running out to war. I hope she changes her clothes. and she goes out to war. So now, do women really, can they go out to war? Is this okay? Is it not? Do they go out to war in the same way that men go out? Does it mean they do the home front? Does it mean there's all different opinions about this? Very fascinating throughout the generations of the rabbis and conversations about this, how to understand this line. Yefet this week, I'm not sure if it went up on the site yet, but it will hopefully go up sometime today, is all about, Rabbi Shimoni teaches about the different topics of this issue, okay? Can you go out to war or not? It's actually a relatively short shiur and straightforward, and I recommend you listen because it's really, really interesting, especially nowadays, right? We have women who fight in the Israeli army. So, how does this work? Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Bameh dvarim amurim b'mechameh mitzvah. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees, and we're going to have to wait for the Gemara to explain really the disagreement. This is all in the mechameh mitzvah. That's what Tana said, mechameh mitzvah. No, you don't go out to, no one gets exempt. According to this, in mechameh mitzvah, you get exempt. But mechemet chova hakol yotzim. He changes the language. He says there's obligatory and there's mitzvah. Okay, mitzvah is where you get the exemption. Obligatory there, afilu chatam echedro v'chala hakol yotzim. Everyone goes out. Afilu chatam echedro v'chala michupata. So we don't really understand this yet. We didn't really understand the distinction between Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yossi, Aglili, Rabbi Yossi. We didn't really understand the distinction yet between Tanakana and Rabbi Yehuda. We're going to have this all in the Gemara. So the Gemara's first question is, my Ikaben Rabbi Yossi, the Rabbi Yossi Aglili. What's the difference between them? Ikabenayu, Avera de Rabbanan. So remember, Rabbi Yossi Aglili said if you have sins, then you go back because you're scared. Rabbi Yossi Aglili said if you have particular sins, right? The widow to the Kohen Gadol, those kind of sins. So what's the difference? That list is all Doraita, Torah law, other than one, by the way. Which one is Derabanan? Chalutza lekohen gadol, lekohen edyo. A chalutza doesn't say in the Torah. It says grusha, zona, v'chalala. Not what grusha. If you remember, we learned this in Yevamot. Grusha extends to chalutza because chalutza is someone who did chalitza, right? Someone kind of said, "I don't want to marry you." That's similar to divorce, and therefore they added it to the list. Some people say at least it has a basis in the Torah, right? Or maybe it just got there because every time they give that list, chalutza is on the list, but he didn't really mean that. Maybe he really only meant all the others. Anyway, that's a very side point I don't want to get into right now, but the point is he lists all these things that are forbidden by Torah law. So he thinks that Torah law would make you scared that you're going to get punished at war, but not if it's rabbinic law. Whereas Rabbi Yossi Aglili said averot biyado very generally, which would include even rabbinic sins. So, Kiman Azla Haditanya, so who's the author of the following bright? Sach bein tefillah letefillah, avirai biyado v'chozer alav me'orchei milchama. If you speak between putting on your tefillin on your hand and your tefillin on your head, okay, now there's a whole debate here what exactly we mean. Is it just by speaking, interrupting, you make a blessing and then you put on both? There's actually two blessings. There's a whole thing about do you say two blessings or one blessing? So there's a whole question here, what exactly we're talking about. Is it just the talking? Or is it that you spoke in between? Now, if you speak in between, then you definitely have to make two brachot. And if you spoke in between and didn't make the second bracha, because you had this interruption, so that makes you responsible to make a second bracha, maybe that's the issue. There's a whole debate, what exactly? I don't want to get into all the possibilities. You can read some commentaries on this. The main thing is, this is obviously some sort of rabbinic issue. So if you speak in between and have this interruption, which maybe it's just the speech that's the problem, maybe it's the fact that you didn't then make an additional blessing, or maybe it's something else, which I'm not going to get into all the options. Avirai biyado, this is a sin, and so much it's a sin that you would go back from war on account of this. But obviously, this isn't a deoraita law. So, Kiman ki Rabbi Yossi Aglili. This must be Rabbi Yossi Aglili, who seem to include even rabbinic. Mantana lahaditana Rabbanan. Again, we're going to bring a bright and say who's the author. Shama kol kranot v'hirtia, hagafat prisim v'hirtia, tzechsuch haravot umayim shotetin lo aberkav, chozeo. If you hear the noise of their shoparot and you get scared, okay, you're at, right? You hear that. You're, again, this would have to be earlier because once you're in war, we don't let you turn around. But if you're standing where they're about to go out to war and they give you this whole speech and you hear the noise of the shoparot blowing the trumpets and you get scared, or you hear the noise of their shields clanging against each other and you get scared, or the sound of the swords and mayim shotetin lo araglav, you start urinating in your pants, okay? That's like a phrase often people use for, right, getting really scared. Chozel, you go back. So Kiman, Rabbi Akiva, below Rabbi Yossi Aglili. This sounds like Rabbi Akiva. That's how we define rach levad. someone who gets really scared of war, not someone who has a sin and is worried maybe I'll get punished there. Well, they say no. Baha, filu Rabbi Yossi Aglili modeh. When Rabbi Yossi Aglili said if you have sins, it means he was adding to Rabbi Akiva. Of course, he thinks that if you're really scared, you go back. He just is saying in addition to that, you go back. And why is that? Because the pasuk says it explicitly. Because we don't want you to affect and demoralize other people that are out to war. So that right actually goes according to everybody. Now we go to this. We have two more things to deal with. One is this line about tchilat nisan nefilah, which seems like it's in the wrong order because it says the beginning of running away is defeat, is falling. That really should be the opposite. It's the beginning of the falling, which is the defeat, is by running away. So that's what the Gemara is going to do. Hi, mipnei tchilat nisan nefilah. That doesn't make any sense. It should be mipnei tchilat nefilah nisan nebayile. The beginning of the defeat is from running away. So Ema, change it to mipnei tchilat nefilah nisan. Just change the order of those two words. Ba'med dvarim amurim b'melchemet hareshut. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, reshut de Rabbanan zohi mitzvah de Rabbi Yehuda. Mitzvah de Rabbanan zohi chovah de Rabbi Yehuda. What does this mean? It means that they're all really talking about the same thing. It's just semantics. Okay? What one calls mitzvah, the other calls reshut. What one calls chovah, the other one calls mitzvah. So Amar Rabba, let's explain this divrei Rabbi Yochanan. Milchamot Yehoshua lechabesh divrei kol chovah. When Joshua conquered the land with the people, everybody agrees that that's obligatory. Milcham, meaning everyone has to go out to war. Tanakama called it mitzvah. He called it, right, Rabbi Yehuda called it chovah, obligation. Milchamot Beit David lerevacha divrei kol reshut. When David went out to conquer extra land and expand the borders of Israel beyond the borders, that everyone agrees is optional. Okay? That's a different category. Ki pligi, what's the machloket between them when Tanakama calls it reshut and Rabbi Akiva calls it mitzvah? That's lemiute goyim de lolete alayhu. This is when you go out on an offensive attack, but to prevent the enemy from coming to capture you later. Okay, it's very interesting to be talking about this right now when we have this operation going on in Israel, right? How do we view this, right? Is this something that is a mitzvah, or is it something that's optional? That's what we're trying to do, is to prevent the enemy from coming to get us later. So, mar karile mitzvah, or mar karile reshut. One calls this mitzvah, this offensive attack, right, as opposed to a defensive. And one calls it reshut. Okay, I'm not getting into politics here, what to call our operation right now. I'm really not going there. I was just thinking that you could connect it possibly. So now, what's the difference whether you call it reshut or mitzvah? Here's a fascinating answer. Nafka mina laosek b'mitzvah shapatra min mitzvah. If you're Rabbi Yehuda and you call this a mitzvah, okay, everyone agrees that you can go back from war if it's that kind of war. You can say, okay, I just got engaged. I want to get, I'm waiting to get married. I'm not going to go. I just built a house. All those are exemptions. But what does it mean? It means if I'm at war, I'm engaged in a mitzvah, according to Rabbi Yehuda, and I don't have to do any other mitzvah. Osek b'mitzvah, patr min mitzvah. According to the rabbis, it's only optional, in which case I'm not exempt from mitzvot. It's a very interesting relevant, as we call it, nafkamina. With that, Hadran alach meshuach melchama, and with that, we finish our chapter. Moving on to the last chapter of Masechet Sotah, which reminds me, if you haven't registered for a siyum, please register. Okay. Egla arufa b'lashon hakodesh. Now we're going to deal with egla arufa, because that was the next on the list. It might even be the last one on the list. Was egla arufa has to be said in Hebrew. Shenema ki matzeh halal ba'adama. Okay, so first of all, I want you to look at the psukim. Maybe we don't have a lot of time today, so I'm not going to read them inside, but I will suggest on Shabbat you read through the psukim of egla arufa. Okay, they're in Devarim chapter 21, verses 1 to 9. What you will notice when you read them is similar to the previous, where we had Kohen, Shotrim, then the Shotrim add. Here we have Zkenecha and Shoftecha, then we have Ziknei Ir, then we have Kohanim. There's also different characters here, and we're going to identify who they are. There's different stages. So Egla Arufa is when somebody dies. We'll go through in the Mishna, Shenemal ki matzeh halal ba'adama, when you find a dead body on the ground. V'yatzuz Kenecha v'Shoftecha. So the Zkenim and the Shoftim go out, and what do? They measure to the closest city to figure out who's the closest city to this dead body. So first of all, there's something weird about the Mishna. The Mishna says Eglah Roof has to be said in Hebrew. Soon we'll get to what's the part that has to be said. That we're not going to get to today. But some of it has to be said and has to be said in Hebrew. But then it says, as it says in the verse. But as it says in the verse, has nothing to do with the Hebrew. You would think it's talking about the Hebrew. No, it has to do with how does the Eglah Rufa ceremony work. So when it says Yatzuz Keinecha B'Shavtecha, what does it mean? Three judges from where? From the big Sanhedrin of 71 that sits in Jerusalem. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Chamisha. Rabbi Yehuda says 5. We're going to see a little bit in the Mishna where they get this from, but we're going to have a whole thing in the end of the Gemara today about how they each read these psukim and where they get their opinions from. Shenemal. So Rabbi Yehuda starts giving his proof. Skeinecha shnayim, shoptecha shnayim. It says your elders and your judges. That's already, each one is plural. 2 plus 2 is 4. Ein beit din shakul, you never have an even number of people on a court. Mosifim aleim od echad. So you add 5. Nimtza tamum begal, o taloi be'ilan, o tzafa pnei hamayim lo yorfin. If the body is found buried under a pile of rubble, or hanging on a tree, or floating in the water, you don't do it. Why? Shenemal ba'adama. It says on the ground, below tamum begal, and not buried under a heap of rubble. Nofel, it says, you find a body, ba'adama, nofel basadeh. So nofel, it fell, below taloi be'ilan, and not hanging on a tree. Fall usually means fell on the floor. Basadeh, in the field, below tzafa pnei hamayim, not if a body floats up in the water. So all these cases, you're exempt from the ceremony of Eglah Rufa. Nimtza samuch l'sfar, o le'ir sheruba goyim, o le'ir she'ein ba beitin, lo yorfin. 3 other exceptions. If you're near the border of the country, or you're near a city that's mostly Gentiles, which is really one and the same, because the border towns, often there were Gentiles there, and the assumption was in those days that Gentiles probably caused the murder. That was the experience they had with the people in their vicinity. Or we've seen a whole bunch of sugyot that show that they were scared they were going to get killed by the Gentiles around them. And a city that doesn't have a court, because we're going to see, we started with the ones who measure are the ones from the big Beit Din, but then the regular kenim of that city go out, and they're the ones who say the whole text that's supposed to be said. So we say now, if there's the closest city doesn't have a court, then we don't do it. But what do? The next sentence kind of comes to fix it. You measure to the closest city that has a court. It's not like you don't do it at all. My kamar. So starts the Gemara and says, how do we get that Eglah Rufa is b'lashon hakodesh? And this is going to already sound very familiar. Amar Rabbi Avau hachi kamar. This is what it means to say. Shene'emar, in other words, it's missing some words here. It says va'anu va'amru, because it says and they answer and say. Remember that from the Levites, in the blessings and the curses. Since those words, right, gzera shavat from there to there. The Seder Eglah Rufa Ketzad. So how does it work? And then the Mishna continues and says, well, how does the Eglah Rufa ceremony work? So what they've done is they've added words. They've said Shene'emar is really this other pasuk. And then now you want to know, how does it work? And then it tells you, 3 come from there. Rabbi Yehuda says Chamisha. Okay. Now, we're going to start with a braita that's going to darshan these psukim for Rabbi Yehuda and for Tanakama. We're going to see in a minute the Tanakama who says 3 judges is actually Rabbi Shimon. Tanu Rabbanan. Yatzuz keinecha v'shavtecha. Keinecha shnayim, shavtecha shnayim. We already had that in the Mishna. Ein beit din shakum mosifim aleim od echad. Harei kan chamisha divrei Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda's proof is the same as we saw before. Zkenim, shotrim, shoftim, and plus we have to add 1 to get it an odd number. Rabbi Shimon omer. So now we need to understand Rabbi Shimon, and soon, by the way, we're going to change Rabbi Yehuda. Zkenecha shnayim ve'ein beit din shakum mosifim aleim od echad. Harei kan shlosha. He just says zkenecha. He doesn't use shoftecha for a drashot. We'll see what he uses it for, but not to teach you how many judges. Zkenecha is 2. Add 1 more to keep it on the odd number. Perfect. Rabbi Shimon, but it says your judges. What do you do with the judges? It's to teach you that you have to find the best, meaning the Sanhedrin. They have to come from the Sanhedrin of 71 that sits in Jerusalem in the temple. There has to be from there. That's what he gets from Shoftecha. So now we're stuck with Rabbi Yehuda. How's he going to explain that? Well, Rabbi Yehuda means ziknei zkenecha nafka. Could have said ziknei. It said zkenecha, your elders. Your elders means your special elders. So ziknei gives you 2, Shoftecha gives you 2, and zkenecha gives you the special ones. Rabbi Shimon says, no, I'll tell you what I learned from Zkenecha, because he needs, right, to learn it from Shoftecha. Why didn't he learn it from Zkenecha? Ping pong here. If it had just said elders, you might have thought old people. I'm not going to give an age here, not offend anybody, right? But whatever we would consider old people, it means an old person. Hatav Rachman is Kenecha to teach you know it has to be a judge. But a judge could be a judge from any court, not necessarily the one in Jerusalem. That's why you need, right? Maybe it's a judge from a court of 3. Shoftecha comes to teach you, then it has to be the special one. So that's why he rejects Rabbi Yehuda's drashot, really. So Rabbi Yehuda is going to say, okay, I'll give you a different way where I get, it has to be the special ones. I'll learn from Xera Shava to a different case. What case? Par Helim Davar Shel Tzibur. When the community does something wrong because the court taught it wrong, then it says the Zkenim have to come, Ziknei Ha'edah come and they do the smicha on the par. They do the action of putting their weight on this par. And there it's specifically ones from the Sanhedrin. So they say, Gamar Ziknei Ziknei Ha'edah, Mala Halam Yuchadim Shebe'edah. Since there it's from the Sanhedrin, Afkam Yuchadim Shebe'edah. What's the problem though? Where did Rabbi Yehuda learn 5? From our psukim? But if he has a Xera Shava to Par Helim Davar Shel Tzibur, there also Rabbi Yehuda says 5. So they say, Igamar, Legamar Lekulim Ultimehatam. Well, then you don't need the drashans, Kenecha and Shoftecha, that you said 2 and 2. Learn the whole thing from Ziknei Ha'edah. There it's 5 and the Sanhedrin. Here it's 5 and the Sanhedrin. And then your whole drashah is useless. So it's not the Xera Shava. We're going to finish right here. Ela vav v'shoftecha leminyana. In the end, what does he say? He agrees with Rabbi Shimon. Kenecha teaches you 2. Shoftecha teaches you miyuchadim from the Sanhedrin, because you can't learn it from the Xera Shava, otherwise there would be no need for the drashah here and for these psukim. But the word v'shoftecha, it could have said kenecha shoftecha. Not really, but let's say theoretically. The fact that there's a vav teaches you that adds another 2. Okay, that's how he gets it. And finish our ping pong. So what about Rabbi Shimon? Why doesn't he learn another 2 from the vav and he only has 3 altogether? Because kenecha teaches you 2 and v'shoftecha teaches you from the Sanhedrin. And again, add 1 to make it uneven. Vav lo mashmalei. Obviously, Rabbi Shimon doesn't darshan vavs. Okay, so from there, we get the whole picture. Okay, let's do a very quick review because it's late. We started with this last halacha of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, quoted by Rabbi Yochanan, about the dead body. And then we had the whole thing about the courtyard. Then we got into all these drashot on miasher rasi shah and all different cases that are included, excluded from the psukim. Then we learned all these things about order of when should you get married, how should you learn, what's the purpose, what's the main thing, what are we aiming at, what's our goal. Then we moved to some of the exemptions we talked about. Let's just go through it, right? The isha chadasha, we went into the category of people who are already married and don't even have to go out. They don't even have to work at the home front, all the drashot there. Then we got to this last speech and we had these 2 debates. One was Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yossi, Haglili, and Rabbi Yossi about who are we talking about who's scared? And then the Gemara kind of helped us smooth out the differences between them. And then we have this machloka, Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbi, Tanakama, about which milchama we're talking about, where in the end, they didn't really argue. It was really semantics, which had some practical ramification about is going out to an offensive war to protect from the future. Is that considered a milchemet? Is that considered a mitzvah? In which case, while you're involved in it, would you be exempt from other mitzvot? And then we started dealing with details of Egla Rufa. The main detail that we dealt with today was the issue of how many judges and the machloket, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon. Tomorrow, you'll be surprised to see maybe there's a 3rd opinion about this that wasn't mentioned in our Mishna. Wishing everybody a Shabbat Shalom.